You're listening to a Nite Muse media production. Tonight we return to the lost art of radio storytelling. Close your eyes if you like, and let the theater of the mind begin. Your host, John Robinson.
Not every story begins with thunder. Some stories begin in sunshine, and sometimes those are the ones that sneak up on you. Now, once upon a time, in a wide green field where summer seemed determined to last forever, there lived a grasshopper who had made a philosophy out of taking it easy. This was not a grasshopper who merely liked comfort. This was a grasshopper who believed comfort was proof that he was living correctly. If the sun was shining, he stretched out in it. If the breeze was sweet, he drifted along with it. If the creek was singing over the stones, he considered that sufficient reason to stop everything and listen. He leapt through the meadows as if the whole world had been made for his personal amusement. And to be fair, in summer it does sometimes feel that way. One golden afternoon he bounded through the clover, singing to nobody in particular, and himself most of all, until at last he flopped down on a warm flat rock and sighed the sigh of a creature completely satisfied with life. Above him, white clouds drifted slow and lazy across the blue sky. Below him, the field buzzed and shimmered in the heat. And beside him, trudging along with the determined little seriousness of someone who had no time for poetry, came an ant. The ant was bent nearly double beneath an ear of corn, far too large for his body, but he carried it anyway, step by step, headed back toward the nest. The grasshopper raised his head. He said, "What in the world are you doing?" But the ant didn't stop. "Working," he said. "Well, I can see that," said the grasshopper. "What I mean is, why? Look at this day. Feel the breeze, smell the grass. The world is putting on a feast of beauty, and you're marching around like an unpaid farmhand." The ant shifted the corn higher on his shoulder and said, "Because when the wind turns cold, beauty won't keep you fed." "Ah, come on now," the grasshopper said. "There's food everywhere. Seeds, leaves, grain, petals, stems. If a fella can't find a meal in a meadow like this, he hardly deserves one." The ant gave him a look that said he had heard such nonsense before. "Summer is generous," the ant replied. "That's exactly why you prepare during it." And with that, he continued on. The grasshopper watched him go, shook his head, and settled himself deeper onto the rock. Poor ant," he said. "A beautiful day wasted on responsibility." And then, because it seemed the appropriate response to somebody else's labor, he took a nap. The next morning dawned bright again, not a cloud in the sky, not a hint of trouble. The world looked so fresh and easy that even the dew seemed to sparkle with misplaced optimism. The grasshopper decided this was not the sort of day one should spend near yesterday's rock. This was a riverside day. So he sprang through the meadow and down to the creek where dragonflies skimmed the water and the reeds whispered together at the edge. He hopped from stone to stone, peered into the clear current, and congratulated himself once again on being the sort of creature who understood how life ought to be lived. And who should appear along the bank but the same ant, this time hauling a broad green leaf overhead like a man carrying roofing supplies before a storm. The grasshopper threw up his arms. "You again? Working again? My dear fellow, do you owe money to somebody?" But the ant kept walking. "We're lining the nest," he said, "strengthening walls, drying stores. Cold comes faster than lazy creatures expect." The grasshopper dropped onto a shaded patch of moss and waved one leg dramatically. "Cold? You talk about cold the way some folks talk about monsters. Always coming, never here." The ant stopped then, just for a moment, and looked him square in the face. "That," he said, "is because some of us notice the days getting shorter." The grasshopper glanced up. The sunlight was still warm, the leaves were still green, the river still lapped over the stones, and so he smiled the smile of a creature who had never once mistaken warning for wisdom. "Well," he said, "when winter gets here, I'll think about winter." The ant nodded once. "Yep, that's usually when the trouble begins," and off he went. Now the field changed little by little after that, the way all important things do. The mornings grew sharper, the shadows stretched longer. The breeze lost a little softness and gained a little edge. But change is hard to notice when you're committed to not noticing it. The grasshopper still sang, still lounged, still floated from sunny place to sunny place, like an aristocrat of absolutely no estate. He saw the ants carrying kernels, leaves, dry stems, bits of husk, and once, impressively, half a biscuit somebody had dropped near a roadside fence. and the grasshopper laughed every time. "Preparing for the end of the world?" he called. "Nope, just preparing for Tuesday," one ant answered, without even looking up. That was the sort of reply the grasshopper hated, because it had the terrible quality of sounding dull and wise at the same time. And then one morning he woke shivering. There was no bird song, no hum of summer insects, no warm light settling over the field. The sky had gone gray, the ground had hardened, and all across the meadow lay a cold white frost, like a warning written in a language he'd waited too long to learn. The grasshopper stood very still. The leaves were limp, the stems were brittle. The easy meals he had trusted were gone, or buried, or withered beyond use. By afternoon, the frost had become snow. And now the field that had once seemed endless in its generosity looked empty as a cupboard after company. The grasshopper searched. He scratched under frozen weeds. He looked beneath stones. He nibbled at stalks that tasted like old paper and regret. By evening he was hungry. By nightfall he was weak. And at last, moving slowly through the drifting snow, he came upon the ant-hill. From inside came warmth. From inside came light. And worst of all, for a hungry creature, from inside came the smell of supper. So he peered in. There were the ants, dry and comfortable, sharing grain, roots, crumbs, and stores enough to last through weather that would have flattened him by morning. And there, near the entrance, stood the very ant who had spoken to him in sunshine. The grasshopper lowered his head. "I suppose," he said quietly, "this would be the part where you say, 'I told you so.'" "Oh, I could," said the ant, "and I'd enjoy it more than I should." The grasshopper said, "Well, that's fair enough." But the ant stepped aside and said, "Come on in. You've learned the lesson already. No need to freeze to death just because you're foolish in pleasant weather." The grasshopper said, "You'd let me in?" The ant looked around at the stocked chamber, the packed shelves, the dry walls, the warm company. "I didn't gather all this just to prove a point," he said. "I gathered it so there would be enough." So the grasshopper came in. He ate, he thawed, he listened while the wind scraped at the world outside. And by the time the deepest winter had passed, he had learned two things. First, not every bright day is a promise. Some are an opportunity. And second, never laugh at the friend who's getting ready while you're still showing off in the sunshine. And the moral of the story? Sing if you want to sing, dance if you want to dance, lie in the sun if you want to. But maybe, just maybe, put something in the pantry before you start giving speeches about how summer lasts forever. Because winter has a funny way of showing up right after somebody says, there's plenty of time. So work while the days are good, prepare for the hard season, and if you have enough, leave room at your table for somebody who learned too late.